Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Procurement's Perfect Storm, Talent Management, brought to you by the Institute for Supply Management and sponsored by Zycus. I'm your moderator, Nora Niebergall. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin today, we want to cover a few administrative items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have any questions at all during this webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these questions during the webcast, but if a more detailed answer is required, or if we run out of time, we'll be answering those via email later. We do capture all questions. If you would like a copy of today's slide deck, it's available in the resource list widget that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues, or you can submit a question through Q&A, and our technical assistants will help you. So let's turn to today's presentation. Today's presenter is Donald Clark, a senior global procurement and supply chain executive with over 30 years of international and domestic experience with a major multinational consumer products corporation. After retiring from Colgate-Palmolive, he decided to pursue a second career in teaching. He currently is a professor of supply chain management at Rutgers University Business School. Donald holds an MBA from the University of Rochester in Operations Management and a BS from Clarkson University in Engineering and Management. In 2014, he received the Procurement Leader's Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing him for both his business and academic contributions. Today, the seminar will address the following topics: the realities of looking ahead at the required skills for developing future procurement leaders, the need for new skill sets to handle risk and complexity and global outsourcing, closing the gap with a talent development plan and a recruiting strategy, and challenges and successful tips for your strategy to build the bench. So Donald, welcome to the program and lead us through it.
Okay. Welcome to everybody that's on the phone or the computer today. Just a brief thank you, Nora. I appreciate the introduction. Just to mention it one more time, I was in business for over 30 years, and then I decided to be in academia. And I think what that brings me is the practical side as well as the academic side on this particular important topic. A perfect storm. You say, well, what is it? And we all have had problems, right? Let me tell you why I think it's a perfect storm. We all know that between many of our companies are globalizing, offshoring, and outsourcing. The reason this is important is that this used to be a place people used to be trained, right? When we had local manufacturing, we could be trained. I myself, early in my business career, spent 15 years in manufacturing, both in supply chain type roles and procurement roles. So you learn it's a great place to train. But now that we've made becoming much more globalized and we've offshore and outsourced, we've lost those kind of opportunities. The second one is that, and you probably all have experienced this in one shape, form, or fashion, the mobility of our top performers isn't like it used to be. We used to ask people to maybe move every 2 or 3 years. And now, particularly with dual income families or potentially people that just don't want to move that much anymore. Maybe they want to stay locally. Certainly the millennials, which we'll talk about later, have a different view of these types of things. And so you just don't seem to have the mobility that we might have had for some of us people that are baby boomers. Certainly in supply chain, particularly procurement, they're doing significantly more with more complex tools. If we just stop and think about the implementation of ERP, enterprise resource planning, or even things like e-auctions, things are a lot more complex now. Of course, we add on top of that, it's not just in our backyard anymore, it's globalized. So all the things that we're currently doing, they're a lot more complex, and that requires a different skill set than we might be familiar with. Lastly, the skilled practitioners are leaving. I'll talk a little more about that in a couple of slides, but basically the baby boomers, the people in my generation, are retiring. and it's a real problem. There's about 10,000 professionals retiring each day, and one of the challenges is that we need to replace them. And we'll talk a little more about that later, but it certainly is it's a challenge. There happen to be more and more people leaving and not enough people to replace them. Just to give you one little tidbit on an MBA program at Rutgers that I am, that our supply chain management students, after completing 2 years of MBA, 95% of them are hired within 90 days after graduation. So they go very, very quickly. A few of you are planning to hire more, and let me just give you a little bit of data looking at it. This is looking at it from a business perspective. But people are demanding higher education. That can be professional type of certifications. It can be associates type people. You can see MBAs. You can see people are saying, hey, I want better educated people here. That's what this chart comes away from. So you can see, just take MBAs that I'm familiar with. People are demanding more and more MBAs. You can see that number is close to plus 10% or so. So they really want to get people that are well educated and trained. And then if you just take a quick look at where people are hiring, where they want to get them from, obviously, particularly in the country right now, many people are in small businesses, less than 100 employees. We're seeing, particularly at Rutgers, more and more small businesses now are taking our students, both undergraduate and graduate. But even if you go to the large corporation on the right side of this chart, 10,000 or more, even they are planning to hire more people. This is the point I was trying to lead up to before. Demographics are working against you. Let me just say that again. Demographics are working against you. So these are things that you really can't do much about. The first one is that in a survey that recently did, that 60% of companies have procurement or supply chain openings. I'm sure you all have some openings. And interesting enough, 15% of those people have openings greater than 5 months. So ask yourself a question. Is it harder to get people today or easier? I suspect you're going to tell me it's been harder to find good people. This idea that 25% of supply chain and procurement management is eligible to retire. This are those baby boomers, 10,000 people a day. And it's only going to get worse as time goes on. When they say, okay, well, just recruit from colleges. Well, 7,600 colleges and technical schools can only fill about 28% of those roles that are retiring. And you can say, well, I got a pretty good bench strength with those people that were maybe the next level down. Those are the people that probably are somewhere around 35 to 44 years old. But that particular demographic, because of the way where it works, is really declining by 15%. So this is a really challenging area. As much as you try to hire good people, you try to find them, you try to retain them, you try to develop them, the pool is much smaller. So this is the KISS principle. I didn't want to use the other word on the end, so I just said keep it simple, sorry. But I think most of us know what the other one is. But talent is a major issue for a number of reasons. As I said earlier, it's a growing demand. People are taking more people, better educated people, more competition for those people. Changing skill set, as we said earlier, that we're more global, we do more outsourcing, things are more complex. So you need a different skill set than you might have had 10 or 15 years ago. Your bench strength, those people that are 35 to 44, the people that you've been developing, many of them are high potentials. There's not as many as there was previously, so that particular group is declining. And lastly, as I said earlier, a lot of people are retiring. Baby boomers are 10,000 people a day. They're retiring quite frequently, and it's only going to get worse. What does all that mean? It means you have a talent shortage. And more importantly, what it really means is that talent is probably one of the most important things that you need to manage, as you probably are well aware. But the way I look at it is if you don't manage talent needs, it's really a failure to manage your procurement group. It's probably one of the most important things. And as we've done surveys recent surveys, we found that the procurement and supply chain professionals are ranking this particular issue of talent probably higher and higher. And some surveys have shown it's almost number 3 or number 2 in certain areas. So this is a big problem, a big challenge for everybody. Then you might say, well, that's only in procurement. Well, maybe, right? What about your suppliers? I mean, this is not just, it's just not focused on the procurement and supply chain professionals. Your suppliers have exactly the same problems that we talked about earlier. And your suppliers are the people that you've decided to outsource to. And you might say, what is their talent? Do they have the right talent to give you what you need long term? And then what about your outsourced partners? I know many people on the webinar today probably have outsourced either maybe certain categories or maybe procurement to pay. What about those outsourced partners? They have the same type of challenge in order to get talent. In fact, in many cases, they could be competing with you for that. All right? And you might say, well, what we've decided to do, we were outsourcing some of the tactical categories for a partner to buy on the outside for us. That's good, right? Certainly good. But maybe you can use the people that you have that are going to manage the strategic items. But again, that doesn't take away from the problem, because you still may not have the right talent and the right skill set inside your thing, and your outsourced partners maybe have trouble getting talent. And then what about everybody else in your company? Because they got the same problems, right? We have all sorts of support groups in finance or quality or risk management. What about those departments? Are they going to be able to have the right talent to support you in your goals and objectives? So I left here food for thought a little bit. We're not going to go into detail here. Are we asking the right questions? We should be asking our questions to our suppliers, to our outsourced partners, and even people within our own company. How are we doing? Are we getting the right talent that we need? The one thing you can do as a procurement group is you can do a formal assessment. And I'd ask yourselves, when's the last time you've done that in your company? It's a relatively easy exercise. I know we're all busy, but it's something you can do very easy. First, you want to identify the skills by role, what the skill sets are, what the standards are, the forecast, those types of things. When's the last time you actually sat down and said, what skills? As I said earlier, many of our jobs have gotten more complex, so maybe there's different skill sets that you need to be able to perform that function. You want to then assess that, the people in your group, maybe through interviews or testing, case studies, however you're going to do it. Try to assess how we're doing, and once you have that, you can potentially, you'll see a skill gap, and you'll know what kind of organization and individuals that you're looking for. Now, you can do this relatively easy yourself. I would suggest many people in HR can help do this. I think I'm right on this. I think ISM can even come in and help you with this particular, activity and assessment. But it's very important to do. And so come back to the question, when's the last time you've done that? If you haven't done it for a couple of years, I would suggest that it's a good activity to do. Now that you have that done, you want to develop a plan to close that gap that we talked about in the previous slide. And this would be a talent development plan about, how you're going to retain those top performers, what kind of education program you need. Potentially, maybe, as I said earlier, you don't have the right people, and you might want to develop some exit strategies for those not able to transform to these new skill sets. Then you need a recruiting strategy, right? And you obviously want to partner with your HR people, but don't outsource it. Don't say it's just them. You need to take a leadership role in this particular area, and you need to develop what process you're going to do for recruiting, screening, and hiring, and partnering potentially with universities that we'll talk about later, and what models you have. And I'd suggest to you that both the talent development plan and the recruiting strategy should be in writing. Right? That way you can circulate it, have comments, talk to people. By having it in writing, I think it becomes a discipline. It needs to be updated once a year or so. If you understand this, I think that you'll be better suited to be able to find people, retain them, and develop them. So the first thing I think we need to do is how do we keep our best people? Remember I said that there's going to be a shortage. There's going to be people that are potentially going to get calls from headhunters and from other companies, or they'll be looking, particularly if they feel like they're overworked and underpaid type of things. So you want to really focus in on how do you keep your best people. And there's a number of attributes here that you can see in the left-hand side. I'm not going to read them, but just two of them I think that are important. Its salary is not usually number one. It's usually the challenging work, and particularly more so today, the work-life balance. You see that a lot with millennials and other people. They want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to try to have a little balance in their life. If you have that, you can then develop strategies around that, right? About how you're going to challenge and nurture these new people. It would be helpful if you can work with your HR to make sure at least you're paying somewhat above industry average, particularly your best people. And you want to encourage people to have more work-life balance, and you want to take an opportunity to mentor and develop these people. This is about retaining your best talent so they don't leave your company and go somewhere else. So here's a test question since I'm a professor now. Which is the best recruiting strategy for attracting new talent? So you have a number of strategies which you can do. Obviously, one of them is internal hiring. Most companies, procurement is many times part of the supply chain. You could bring people in from other parts of the supply chain, from manufacturing, maybe quality, or those types of things. So that's a good place to bring people in. Second would be non-supply chain people. This is particularly applicable maybe in your indirect space where potentially you need some expertise. You might bring a marketing person in to manage your promotion and advertising, or an IT person to come help manage and procure your IT needs. You certainly can go external. We've already talked a little bit about that. Certainly university recruiting is a part of that. We talked about that, where it should be in your portfolio. Lastly, you can do temporary staffing needs. A lot of people do this. This is the way you bring somebody in on a temporary basis to fill a need, which is always helpful. And one thing nice about that is that if they work out many times, you can roll it over and then hire them permanently. It gives you a chance to look under the hood, so to speak, and see whether that person might work for you. Internal hiring of temporary, mentioned that. And then lastly, you can certainly, as we said earlier, you can take partners like Zycus or other people, try to outsource non-strategic areas. Procurement to pay. When I was in Colgate, we actually outsourced a number of what we considered tactical categories, have somebody on the outside purchase those categories. So the question is, which ones are the best? I think you already know the answer. You got to do all of the above. If you have a talent shortage and it's looming out there and you're seeing problems, you're going to have to do all of these things. You have all these levers that you can pull for attracting talent in your organization. A couple other recruiting tips. Develop great position specifications. I'm sure that you were probably different than I was when I was at Colgate, but when we worked on a global procurement transformation in 2004 to 2008, and we did this assessment of the group. I'm sure all your position descriptions are up to date. Well, you know, what really happens is that many of them have dust on them. That's if you can find them. So one of the things you want to do when you're recruiting, you want to update those job descriptions. Make sure they're current, as that's a starting point to bring people in and evaluate them. You want to pay particular attention to the interview process. You have to remember this leaves a very lasting impression upon your organization. You want to be organized. You want to have some sort of strategic interview plan. You have probably a team-based, maybe a case-based, and you want to have some sort of post-case evaluation. So what we don't want to do is to bring in a high potential person, either from a university or the outside, to join our company. We don't want to leave them in the lobby for an hour and a half because we're busy doing other things. So we want to make sure that this is done very professionally, and we spend time trying to evaluate the candidate. Cultural fit's good. I find that HR people, human resource people are very good at this, but you want to make sure that they're going to fit your culture. And we want to make sure we do market dynamics before offers. So again, referencing to some transformation work that I did in 2004 to 2008 in Colgate, one thing that we didn't fully understand is we were developing and expanding the indirect procurement area. We didn't realize that this was a very hot topic on the outside, and it was many people were getting higher salaries, so sometimes you need to do a market study to determine what those indirect procurement people, or whatever you're trying to do it. So you can ask your HR people to help do that, to try to understand what people are getting paid on the outside. Lastly, try to do this quickly. As we said earlier, many jobs have been open. 15% of the jobs are open for over 5 months, as we said earlier. You want to make sure that this is done relatively quickly. 2 reasons. One, you want to make sure that you can keep in touch with the candidate during that time frame. But more importantly, he's probably going to be looking at other opportunities out there. And as I said earlier, with his talent shortage, he probably has options available to him. So you want to do this relatively quickly. And then if you do like one of the particular ones, it's good to pick the phone up and see how they're doing, what they're looking at. And if potentially if they're thinking going to another company, you might want to expedite your process to hire them. One of the most important things is retention. And what we mean by that is that you got to retain your high potential people. It's a lot harder to go out and fill those positions, and it's less risky. What I always tell people is that you got to manage your high potential people first, and what I mean by that is you certainly want to make sure that your high potential people are talked to and discuss and ask careers and all that type of thing. But you also have many times functional people that probably aren't going to be the next chief procurement officer, but they're functionally capable, and you really want to make sure you look for those people also. So sometimes they may not be high potential, they may not be moving up the ladder, but they're very important to the business, particularly if they have a functional expertise that is difficult to replace. You want to hold frequent career discussions. This is particularly true with millennials. We used to probably do this, twice a year maybe. And the millennials basically, they send you a text and say, what's that, how am I doing? And you're going to have to get back to them relatively quickly. You can use rotational assignments with your high potential people. Ask them to rotate jobs with 2 people. That's usually within your control, within your procurement organization. You can switch 2 people out. Or even if it's in the supply chain, you can roll people in and out. So it's a very easy way to do it, and it's really low risk, and it's a great way to retain them. And so it's something to consider. You can put them on special assignment. If you want to bring somebody in maybe from outside the country that you're in, or potentially from another department, you could bring them in on a special assignment to see how they work out. And again, if you have somebody that's a high potential person that you want to watch and see how they do, there's nothing better way to put them on a special assignment and see how they complete it. If you want to give particularly your high potential people top management exposure, it's as simple as asking one of your junior people to come in potentially and present at your staff meeting, or maybe you're the senior staff of the overall business. You better believe when they do that, they feel very good about it, and it also gives management a chance to take a look, see how they do in the topic they're talking about and how they present and how they communicate. You want to have a designed written retention program for your key employees, about who they are and what you're going to do with them. It might be as important as maybe you have some sort of a bonus plan for these people to make sure that you tell them if we complete these objectives in the next 2 or 3 years or whatever, every year, maybe you have a bonus plan that might be above and beyond if you have flexibility within your company to do that. But you definitely want to have some sort of retention program for these key employees. Take risks on people. We found when I was at Colgate, we did the organizational design, and we found out we were, having some trouble with the middle management. And, we'd say to people, well, the junior person's down there, they've only had maybe 1 or 2 years experience. Take a risk. You'll know relatively quickly whether they can, do the job or not. But it's it certainly sends the right signal to the organization. And if they're mentored properly, the high probability of success. But don't be afraid to bring some junior people into more senior roles. It certainly will be a way to retain them, and many times, as you might expect, they work out. And as we've said many times before, recognition is worth more than money. So if you give them this top managed exposure, you give them special assignments, you talk to them about their career on a frequent basis, all these things will retain people, and that's your number one area you want to concentrate on. Lastly, leave the door open if they leave. I can tell you one story. We had a high potential. Fortunately, the fellow wanted to leave and go to a competitor. He came into me, thanked me for his great experiences that he had at Colgate, and I said two things to him. I said, number one, I wish you the best of luck, and number two, if you have a problem, give us a call and he'll be right back. Sure enough, he goes to a competitor, ends up right before he arrives, they change the supervisor on him, and he doesn't like the supervisor. So he called me back, and we took him back. A lot of companies would say, oh, no, we can't do that because, once they leave, they leave. Remember, you have a talent shortage out there. And if this was a high performer, if you bring them back, they're going to stay. What about those millennials everybody's talking about? What do I do with them? Well, we've heard a lot of stories about them. They're very digital. They're the people that are on their iPhone. They're very connected. Those are the ones that send you texts and want to know an answer in 30 seconds. They typically have less dollars to spend. Many of them have high debt and priorities. We've heard a lot of stories about them. Whether we like it or not, this is the largest growing group of people that we're going to be pulling from. Millennials account currently for about 36% of the workforce, and in less than 10 years, it'll be 75. So whether we like it or not, they're here to stay, and that's the pool you're going to have to pull from. So we have to learn how to work with them. We've seen a lot of studies about millennials. People have written articles about them. You can read the list here, but they're very interested in career movement, very socially collaborative environments. I guess the only watch out I would say is that we tend to say they're all like that, and that's not true. There's different millennials. They don't all have these characteristics. Some, might have, more baby boomer characteristics. Some might be like the list here. So they're not all the same, but they are different, and I think we just need to be attuned to that. Many times I'll see in an MBA, one of my star students goes to a Class A company, and they'll call me up and they'll say, I don't like my boss. It just doesn't feel right. I say, well, do you like the company? Yes. Do you like the people you're working with in the company? Yes. It's a darn good company you're working for. So one thing before you jump ship, she wanted to know whether she should leave. I said, certainly try to work with your boss. You're never going to have, all bosses aren't going to be perfect, obviously. But more importantly, look for other opportunities within the company if it's the right company. So they tend to jump very quickly, and we need to be cognizant of that fact that, millennials tend to want to move if things aren't moving quick enough for them. And we talked about some retention strategies that can help mitigate some of those, but we need to realize that they do think slightly different. Most people on the webinar have some sort of management development program. There are studies that have been done. What I mean by management development program about how you evaluate your talent and high potentials and development programs. The studies show that the results of most management development programs, only about 30% of them work well, 30%. So if talent is one of the most important challenges that we have going forward in the future, we got to have a good management development program. We were very fortunate at Colgate when I was there, and other companies there, we had very good management development programs. But even if your company has one that's maybe not up to par, develop one within your group at a bare minimum. The first thing you want to do is have challenging objectives that are tied to the business. Do this usually on an annual basis, but you want to make sure you evaluate those objectives, either however you do it, twice a year. You always want to have both hard objectives, did they hit the cost-saving objectives, but soft, how they get the job done. And you can get some help from using 360 analysis about people that work around them or stakeholders in their business on some of the soft competencies, which can also give you an indication of how the person is doing. You want to have it very formal and be reviewed by senior management within procurement, within the supply chain, by the leadership of the company. And you want to make sure you hold employees and managers accountable for training and development. We know that sometimes we'll write in their annual review that you must complete, this course and whatever, negotiation or whatever. So I think it's a dual responsibility. The employee's got to be motivated to do that, and the manager. And if they don't, you need to give people feedback, both the manager and the employee, to say, why didn't we get this? If it was important enough to put in your annual review, why doesn't the employee and the manager get it done? And then lastly, hopefully you have some flexibility in your performance to reward people. Obviously with bonuses, but also special assignments and other things. You want to make sure you reward people when they truly have extraordinary performance. So again, my take on management development is one of the most important processes in the business. And if you I would encourage your management to do it, and even if they don't, you certainly can do this within your own procurement group. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to partner with a university. This is a question that I get quite frequently in my role at Rutgers. They'll say, how do we partner with people? I'm just going to take this quote. It's a little bit dated. I'm not going to read it, but I think it was an interesting quote. This is AMR, which is now Gartner. But anyway, the point of the quote is that there's a crisis building in the area of talent with increased responsibility, complexity we talked about, globalization. And I think the universities have to play a role in this particular area. And I know we've done this at Rutgers, but other schools have done it. And they really need to step up and take a leadership role in order to get the best talent. Now, this isn't going to fill the whole gap, as I said earlier. Universities can only still provide probably 28 to 30% of those needs. But having said it, it is an opportunity, and universities need to take a leadership role. So if you're not familiar with universities, this is basically how most universities and departments are looked. This happens to be for our supply chain department. You can take an active role in many of these areas. I'll talk about some of these a little more in depth in a minute. Most all universities do some sort of leading edge research. And my question would be, if you're involved in universities, are you demanding that research and making sure that research is practical to your needs? Excellence in teaching and students, that's a given in a university. But again, you should get involved with these programs and see what kind of programs, kind of courses. You can evaluate it by coming in and being a guest speaker and those types of things. And lastly, partner with industry. Most supply chain management departments and schools have some sort of an advisory group that you can be an active participant in, and I'll talk a little more about that on the next slides. But the point would be this is how universities are generally set up, and they're critical for you to engage with the university. So here's some ways you can partner with academia. As I said earlier, the first one is that most schools have some sort of center of supply chain management. If they don't, ask them why not. And you can easily join that. In the case of Rutgers, we have an advisory board for both the MBA or graduate level, and we have one for the undergraduate level. So it's an easy way to be involved with the university. Sometimes there are fees with that, sometimes there isn't. You want to be able to this area about having research and making sure it's practical, you want to engage with the faculty and the research to make sure what they're working on is appropriate not only for you, but just in general. So you want to get close. One way to do it is say, tell me what research you're working on, and then you can give input into that. We have our particular supply chain management advisory board members. Many times they sit in the research meetings and they give feedback to the professors and to the PhD students. You want to demand executive education programs on campus and in-house. Most all universities will give, if you ask them to develop a specialized program for you or a certification program. If they don't, you certainly could encourage them to do it. Many times they run in-house programs where people come in for a day and get some sort of training. But if they're not doing it, you want to make sure that you demand that because it's important. You want to visit the campus frequently. A lot of ways to do this. This is the question people say, well, geez, it's hard. It's hard to do. How do I engage with the campus? Well, you can come in and be a guest speaker in a class. Very simple. And the students love it. The professor loves it. It's a great way to build relationships. You can come in at lunchtime. Generally, there are some sort of supply chain clubs available or other types of clubs, and you can come in and speak, and they can say about a particular topic, get a lot of questions from the students. And lastly, even case competitions. Again, you can be a judge. You can be engaged as to help out with a case if necessary. There's a lot of things you can do to engage without spending a lot of extra time, and it's maybe even a once-a-year type activity. Lastly, probably the most important thing is you want to be able to take students in what I call win-win internships, co-ops, or projects. This is probably one of the most important things I think that business people can do. And what I mean by that is if you take a student in for an internship, typically a summer, 12 to 14 weeks, co-ops can be 3 to 6 months, or even, as we do at Rutgers, having them work on projects, capstone type projects to work with the students. If you think about it, if you get to know these students, your people that work for you in procurement get to know the students, you're going to know at the end of that 12 to 14 weeks of internship or that co-op for 6 months, or even if it's a project for a semester, you're going to know whether that particular individual should be considered to be hired. You're going to know that. Versus going out, as I said earlier, and recruiting from the outside, going through a set of interviews, sometimes unfortunately it's rushed, and instead of having somebody interview somebody for 30 minutes to an hour and making a decision that you're going to hire them, that's a lot more risky than doing things such as internship, co-ops, and projects. And quite frankly, it's relatively inexpensive. You can work with your HR people on this, but it really doesn't cost a lot. For example, in the projects area, we run a industry client projects at Rutgers. Just one example, those are free. And so many times you can get 4 to 5 MBA students or undergraduate students. They'll work on a project for a semester, maybe longer. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get a quality outcome that probably you would pay a consultant, whatever, $50,000 to $100,000 to do. So something to really think about. What about this next generation of graduates? And I'm going to go through 5 areas. The first one is leverage. Most of these new breed supply chain management graduates, particularly on the graduate level, MBAs, most of them are dual degrees. So I think this is true in all schools now. So they'll typically be a supply chain or finance or supply chain and marketing. So it really gives you students that have a much broader range than just one discipline. Again, you want to look for opportunities, I said earlier, for internships and co-ops. You want to recognize the core values, particularly millennials, are different. Doesn't make them bad, but they're different, and you need to react differently and manage them differently. Retain. You should realize that you're going to have more turnover. It's a good question to track. What's your turnover every year? And because of the shortage, more people are going to be looking for people, and unfortunately, they're going to steal people from you unless you have a good retention plan in there. And then balance, as I said earlier, you need a multi-pronged approach. As I said earlier, you want to consider all of the above to be able to recruit students and people. So what are some of the key takeaways? One is that I think talent management will determine procurement success, more so than anything else, more so than that, that software program you put in, more so than those great category management that you're doing. I think talent will do it. If you think about the difference between an average company and a world-class company, I would argue it's the people. We all know how to do this stuff. We may not have enough people, but we all know how to do it. But that talent is what makes you successful. You want to do this internal skills assessment. And if you haven't done one for a while, start tomorrow. It's not a hard thing to do. You can have your human resource people help you, but that'll get you at least determine what gaps you have. And I suspect if you haven't done one for a while, that skill set that we've talked about today has dramatically changed. It's gotten a lot more complex. You want to have a formal strategy for developing, training, and retaining your people. I would suggest to you this should be written, and you should be reviewed at least once a year by your staff that you're working with. And you can easily do this. Doesn't have to be a whole company type of thing. You can do this right within your own procurement group, so everybody can be on the same page as you're moving forward. That next generation, as I said earlier, it's going to come from multiple sources, right? Some of them will come from universities, but not all. But certainly there's going to come from all different types of sources. You're going to need to do that to fill that talent gap. And you can partner with a supply chain management university. There are a lot of ways to do that. I would start small. You don't need to spend some sort of large amount of money to join an advisor group if there's a fee. You can start just by coming to the campus and starting to get to know the students. So I would definitely do that as one of your strategies. And lastly, you should have a robust internship and or co-op program. This is really important. No risk hiring. You will know at the end of that internship or co-op whether you want to hire this person. You maybe don't have the funds to do it. That's a different problem. But you will know. That's a lot less risky than taking somebody off the street and hope that they work out. And we all know that when they don't work out, at least in most big companies, it is very difficult to get rid of that person. So it's an important way to do it, no-risk strategy. So we'll do questions in a minute, but what I'm going to do is just going to jump to a little bit about Rutgers Business School. I'm not going to read the slide. I want to make two important points here and I'll come back to the Q&A. The first one is that just interesting. So we have a very robust MBA program, supply chain management program. But in 2009, we launched an undergraduate supply chain program. And the first year it was 60 students. Next year it was 157. The next year it was almost 400. It's now 800 undergrad supply chain majors, 800. And they tell me, I'm not that directly involved in the undergrad, they tell me that in the fall of this year, it'll be 1,000 supply chain management majors. I'm not talking about students. I'm talking about 1,000 supply chain management majors at Rutgers campus. That's kind of amazing. Just think about the growth there. And then lastly, if you haven't done it, you can see the list. This is a little bit dated. We just got ranked, the MBA program got ranked number 7 by Gartner. If you don't have access to the Gartner, you might find it on the web somewhere. But Rutgers is ranked number 7 and in the MBA program and number 5 in the undergrad. And I'm not just saying that because that's certainly important, but you can use that list as a starting point looking for good schools. And I'm sure you can get that off the web or you can call Gartner and potentially get it. So just 2 points there. Let me go back to the questions, and I'll take as many questions as I can until the time runs out.
Thanks so much. That was a great presentation. We have so many questions from the audience. So we're going to start with going back to that university program, partnering with the university. A couple questions about that. So what do you recommend in terms of engaging with universities even when you may be in an economic state of layoffs? You need to be ready to ramp up later. So you've talked about participating in case competitions, maybe offering co-ops, but during lean times, what other levels of engagement? Are there things that schools look to look to local industry to provide? Are there executive councils? What other types of engagement would be really great for working with universities?
Yeah, the first one is one of the things I'd say, and I understand sometimes for budgetary reasons you can't maybe take students or those types of things. I would challenge you to say that even in bad times, you usually have a project or two that you might need done, and you potentially could bring the student at a relatively low cost to do that. But the first thing I would say, consistency. The biggest advertisement you can have for your company is to have students talk about your company. So by you showing up and doing just presentations in a classroom, lunch and learns, case competitions, people get to know you and the company a little bit. So when you do come back to the hiring, people say, oh, I know about company XYZ because they come every year to my supply chain management lunch and learn, and I've seen people like that. So at least if you're not in a hiring mode due to lean times, that at least they know who you are. And I can tell you that the companies that do that well get the best students because they get what I call they're known by the students. When they go to post a job, when they finally do have post a job, they end up getting huge amounts of students that want to be interviewed for that role, and you'll get the best students. So as I said earlier, even if you don't, in lean times, don't have to do it, many of these people have industry projects, so you can approach the school and get these students for free. And we do that in our industry project client project where we give preference to advisory board members, but we have so many students now that we have to use non-advisory board members, and they can do a project for free. So if you don't have any money in your budget, you can usually do that every year. And last I checked, I may be wrong, but I would say everybody on the phone has a project they need to have done and they don't have enough people.
Great answer. That's a really good answer. Earlier when you were talking about management development, preparing people for leadership roles, you mentioned that it's less risky to give a good worker a chance at management. How would you handle the situation if things didn't work out? How would you ensure the employee doesn't become disgruntled or take it personally, or how do you maybe work to put them in a better role? Because I would imagine there are times where, it's just not a good fit and things just don't work out. So what are some tips there?
Yeah, so certainly it happens. I've been more pleasantly surprised than disappointed, to be honest with you. I'm always surprised when it does work out. When it doesn't work out, then when it does. But in any case, one thing you can do is be upfront with the individual to say something like this. Look, this is a major, before you bring him in the role, you say, we're going to give you this role. It's going to be a challenging role. We, the management team, had some concerns, not about you personally, but we want to let you know that you're going to be watched very closely, and here's what our expectation is. So the first thing we do is you tell them right up front what the expectations are. You got a good job description. And you probably want to give them good feedback. So if, and it does happen every once in a while, it does not work out, then you come back to that discussion and say, we had this discussion and unfortunately it doesn't work out. And hopefully if you think the person is worth mentoring and development, maybe the role was too broad for them, you could say to them, hopefully you can find a slot in your organization. Or if it's really a situation where you said, well, it doesn't look like this person's going to work out long term, I think you got to bite the bullet and put an exit strategy in place. But I think you ought to tell the person up front, and then you ought to monitor it more frequently than you would for a more mature employee. And then more importantly, when it does, so if it doesn't work out, they know. And then if you think they're worth keeping, you want to make sure you give them a role that maybe might be a bit smaller than that you put them into.
Okay, well that's good. We've got a few questions here, though, about not necessarily looking at, the best and brightest students, but when you're trying to fill a position that requires somebody who has some experience. And so what are some key suggestions for recruiting that talent with 5-10 years worth of work experience? Some people are finding it a challenge to find, good qualified talent that has the right skill set. So what are some tips for looking at filling those more mature roles? And also, on the other hand, we have also received quite a few questions from people who are in that spot and I think are looking for ways to make themselves maybe more attractive to potential employers.
Yeah. Well, it's again, you're going to face this going on because of the looming talent shortage, so we'll have to get good at it. But one thing I think which you potentially can do is have a good job description, know what your needs are. So as a starting point, you want to make sure you understand that and be able to at least evaluate that person, even though they may not be 100% what you want, about how close they have to. You may have to give up a little bit and then have a development program in order to get that person where you need to get. So that's one thing you can do is to have, as a starting point, make sure you know what you want, and then if the persons that you're looking at do not fit that exactly, you potentially could say, okay, if we do bring this person on board, what are the 3 or 4 things that we need to do immediately to get them up to snuff? I also think that if you're looking for people that have those skills that might be in a department, I mentioned the indirect area as an example, where many times you can get people that have that functional expertise, but they don't have procurement expertise. So we, at least in my past career, many times we would pull people in from other areas, i.e. marketing or IT. And I personally think that there is no magic to procurement. That's a skill that's trainable. You're not born with it. Most people on the phone, probably many people never had procurement training or training before they came in. So you can take these people out of the particularly your business, if they know your business, maybe other people's business, and then you have to have a robust training program to get them up to snuff so you'll feel comfortable with them. And you're going to have to, lastly, you're going to, because of the talent shortage, you gotta throw that net out bigger than you ever threw it before. That may require recruiters. That may require going to organizations like ISM to be able to network with people and find people. So maybe the old way of putting not that many people do this anymore, but posting it on a job board or LinkedIn just isn't good enough. You got to have a network out there to be able to pull the people that you want in. And you meet them, you keep a diary about them, and then you say, hey, I met this guy 3 years ago at ISM. He seemed to have that IT or marketing experience. Let me ring him up. He may not be looking, but maybe I can convince him to come to our company.
And then, on the flip side of that, I mean, for instance, we have received, several questions from people who are in that experienced set. As somebody who's sat there on the other side of the desk hiring people, what are the main tips that you would have for somebody who has that level of experience that maybe needs to change jobs or finds himself in a position where the organization's downsized? How do they compete using that experience, and what are the things they really need to look at seriously in terms of improving themselves?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd say that most people that have been, let's say, working for 10 years or whatever, the way you'll get a job will be networking and probably using some sort of retained or maybe contingency recruiter. So one thing you want to do is you want to be linked in by having a big network out there. So when you're looking to maybe leave the company and that skill set, you want to do it. I would recommend, for those interested in this, read a book called Rites of Passage by John Luke, who's a personal friend of mine. He'll tell you about how you network and how you use recruiters. The important thing about this is that you don't want to just wake up on Monday morning and start this process. This is an ongoing process that you need to do and to keep your feelers out there. And I would recommend to people potentially having 1 to 2 interviews a year, whether you're looking for a job or not. Why? Because it gets you, one, you might find something you like, and secondarily, it keeps your interviewing skills up about those particular skills that you have. You go into a particular interview, you can see whether or not how you sell those skills. So it's called Rites of Passage by John Luke. It's a #1 bestseller. It's considered the Bible of getting jobs, and it's something very important. And I think you've got to do that even when you're not looking. Quite frankly, now that I'm retired, I can say it. I used to take at least 2 interviews a year when I was working with various companies, mostly to see what was out there, but more importantly, see if there's opportunities. And I was not a job hopper. I only worked for 3 companies, so I didn't leave many companies, but I certainly knew what was out there. And also through this networking, when you go to these organizations like ISM, again, you network with people, and you know who those people are, and you'll be able to leverage that later on to find a job that you might want or need.
Oh, excellent tips. Thank you. We received a couple of questions about rewards, and how you talked about beyond the monetary, but maybe also monetary rewards, but rewards for exceptional performance. A couple of folks wanted to know what the best practices were currently, and then at least one individual wanted to know how you could set up a reward system for exceptional performance that it doesn't appear to be favoritism. So that's kind of a provocative question. So what are some of the best things that you've seen in terms of recognition programs for excellent performance?
Right. So let me just touch on the financial piece first, and I don't know if that's. I'll bring back to some other ones in a minute. But so if you're having a high turnover, when I was at Colgate 2004, 2008, we're going through a massive transformation. And we were very concerned about losing some of our talent people doing this. We actually lost a few because people got frustrated. But you can set up, and it depends on your HR people and your company, that type of thing. But you can go to your HR people and ask to say, look, I'm really worried about these particular people and they're my high potentials. I want to make sure you do it. And you can put a financial incentive them to stay during this particular transformation or whatever you're doing. So that's one thing you can do from the financial side. On the other side, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of options to recognize people, right? It can be as simple as going to the senior staff and presenting, let's say, a risk management plan to the senior staff. They'll feel like $1 million when they go in and they're presenting, let's say, let's make it in the company, to the president and the COO and all the various heads of the company. That doesn't cost you a dime, and they'll feel like $1 million. You can recognize them by giving them a special assignment to say, for the next 3 months, I want you to work on this particular problem that we're having, and people will know that you pull them out of that role, and they'll know that they're being recognized. All these things don't cost you a lot of money, but yet the people will feel that, hey, I'm special, I've done some of these things. Probably one of the easiest things you can do, and this is particularly true with millennials, is just spend more time talking to them. So we had a particular situation in my business career where we had lost a number of high potential people, and I went around and the HR person, I said, we're losing some good people, what should we do? And they said, well, get out of your damn office and go to their cubicles and talk to them. It may seem a little bit weird, but if you do that, again, they feel recognized. You came to them and you ask them questions about how they're doing and those types of things. That doesn't cost you anything more than a walk around. And I can tell you when we did that we didn't lose another person after we did that, at least on high potentials we didn't. So there's lots of things that you can do. Sometimes you have a particular person in a region that's one of your high potential people, and you're worried about losing them, and maybe they're overseas somewhere, and they really don't want to move because of the culture and family and that type of thing. Bring them into your headquarters for 3 to 6 months, right? And again, it might cost you a little bit of hotel rooms, but it's relatively inexpensive to be able to do that. And again, they know they're special. The people back in that overseas country know that they're special because they've come into that headquarters for 3 to 6 months to be able to do it. So those are easy things to do, and they're all within our control, and they don't cost a lot of money.
That's fabulous. Great ideas. We have so many fabulous questions, and I do want to reinforce that we will follow up and answer all of these with everyone. So, Donald, I want to thank you so much for a great program. We've got a few things that we need to wrap up on here at the end, but clearly a lot of interest in this topic, and thanks so much for bringing your expertise, and to Zycus for also sponsoring this presentation so that we could have this discussion. I do need to just cover a few things at the end. We want to make sure that you know that you will receive an email that will provide you with information on how to access the archive as well as additional information. And if one of my colleagues at ISM could forward to the next slide, that would be fabulous. And what we would like to remind people is that ISM also has a great a career center that we too can provide expertise in helping people find jobs and also helping employers find their next employee. So we urge you to check out our new and improved ISM Career Center. And we also ask that you keep in mind that you will receive an email within the next 24 hours with the information about your CEHs. We also ask that you fill out the survey at the end of this program. It does help us improve our programming. And finally, we would like to thank our speaker for bringing such a great level of expertise. Donald, thanks very much. Could you repeat the name of that book again? Everybody would like to read the book.
Yeah, just go to Amazon.com and books, you'll find it. It's called Rites of Passage by John Lucht, L-U-C-H-T. And you can get it paperback, hardback. He also has a workbook, but just get the book. It's probably the Bible of getting jobs. It's a terrific book.
Rite of Passage, right?
R-I-T-E-S, Rites of Passage.
Rites of Passage, great. Well, thanks again to everyone for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful day, and stay tuned for our next web seminar soon.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.